Leaders are not born, they're built. While building leaders is a challenge, at Engineering Leadership, we've created a framework that actively guides anyone to discovering their potential. We establish 17 constant values that cannot be compromised no matter the situation. They offer insight to the core of leadership and provide a starting point that simplifies the world's most complicated topics. With these constants, you will be able to empower yourself and your team to tackle situations deemed impossible.
I'm Doug Hawk, your host for Engineering Leadership. Thanks for joining us for another episode today. We are joined today with Carl Schlachte. He's Chairman, President, and CEO of Ventiva. And Carl's been kind enough to join us today to talk about the constant of trust. And we've got a list of questions, Carl, but I just wanted to start out by saying I did read your article or one of your posts on the peach stand experience, and
Right.
it really caught my attention. And one of the things you wrote in there was this interaction that your wife had with this vendor, and you said the entire conversation between them was a relationship that had a thread of trust running through it. And counterintuitively, that trust came with a discount. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for picking trust. It's obviously a great topic and something that so many of the other constants build on. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And I know you had a chance to read some of the other constants that we work on. Where's trust fit in that sort of structure for you? And I've always viewed it as, again, a building block for many of the others that sort of has to come first in some cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that it's been the thread, I think, or the foundational block that I think a lot of good functional teams work from. They don't often call it trust. It gets called a whole bunch of other things. Trust seems sometimes a little too squishy or touchy-feely, when in reality, it's probably among the base human emotions that we all started with. It's the experience of a child to a parent. It's the experience of a friend to a friend. And you don't lose all that stuff the moment you show up at work. You're carrying every bit of that in with you. So for me, it's foundational. And the foundational piece, if you get the foundation right, the structure is sound. But you got to work on the foundation. And so that's why I chose trust.
That's awesome. One of the things and I talk about this with folks that I try to mentor and with my own team actually at times, and that is, what I call the paradox of trust, right? Because it's, it's hard to trust someone you don't know, and to build a team, get to know them. But if you don't, grant some measure of trust, how do you ever kind of get past that, right? So, what were the experiences early for you that sort of allowed you to kind of, find trust in those you work for, build trust with those that first started working for you? Any approaches that you've used consistently that have helped out?
Yeah, sure. Well, early on, I think I'm like a lot of people that you start early off, and you're put in your career, you're put in kind of the indentured servitude part of the quadrant, right? You're gonna work very, very hard for very, very little, and you're gonna try to understand as much as you possibly can. And the beautiful part of that is you get a very broad view, if you're paying attention, on different leadership styles, how people treat each other, what they expect of you, whether they ask you the simple question like, how are you doing today? And they really listen to the answer.
Right.
Whether it's a true conversation or a perfunctory conversation. And I always felt like I was, as early on in my career, I was performing best where I was getting the opportunity to know, connect, put context around the people that I was working with and for. And then also given a certain degree of latitude to go off and innovate on my own. I think one of the beautiful things about an engineering degree in particular is there's a bit of mastery and artistry to working in the space, for as much as most people don't think of engineering that way. And that creative piece that generates innovation, that also generates success, relies on somebody trusting you enough to risk a little bit. And I saw that kind of early on. I especially noticed, to be fair, I noticed it in the negative more than anything else. When it wasn't there, when it wasn't happening, it was just awful. It was just dysfunctional and stressful and wrong, and you just knew things at your gut weren't right. But when you ran into the people that got it and really understood what the power of trust and connection was, I felt like I was dropping weights and running very, very fast. And so I kind of made a decision early on that I wanted to be that kind of leader, not the kind of leader that was transactional, but the kind of leader that was really supportive of the individual. And so I built my career on that part.
You think it's been, in the high tech space, and I've lived on sort of both sides of industry. I'm an energy guy predominantly, but I started a .com and the 99 internet craze the first time around, and spent a better part of a decade on the technology side versus the industrial side. And it was striking to me how much more transactional things tended to be. Maybe it was just my experience, but it was, I think, because things were changing. It's high tech and it changes so fast, and companies are they're suffering from that creative destruction perhaps faster than any other part of our economy. Do you think is it more of a challenge in high tech than other industries that might have, longer cycles, I guess, where people deal with each other for longer periods of time?
I think you just nailed it. That is exactly it. It's you compress the cycle, you look for an immediate result. And by the way, I'm not endorsing this. I actually think it's wrong, but
Right.
there is a pressure in a high tech company to get a very immediate, flashy, big result.
Right.
And that tends to turn, in my opinion, it tends to turn the people that you're working with into objects, not subjects. And so you start to think about work output and how many hours somebody's working, and are they sleeping under their desk, and all of these metrics that start to say to the person that you're only working on this stuff when I can see you, and when in some instances because you haven't showered in a week, when I can smell you, right? But I've seen companies that do that and are successful and they get rewarded for it, but I've seen companies that do it the other way, and are just as successful. The thing is, it's less dramatic and they get less credit for it. When I say less credit for it, I mean those kinds of things aren't written up, because who wants to write about, like, the fact that Doug got to go home at 6 o'clock and eat dinner with his family?
Right.
What they really want to write about is that you were there until midnight and you were strung out on coffee and all those things, because it seems very dramatic and it's very narrative worthy. But that makes the person into a cog in a machine. And I don't know. That's not a good way to live, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think it actually played a role for me in terms of going back into the energy side of the business versus staying in tech when I was over there, just because our industry really exists on trust. I mean, it's we deal with, dangerous materials. You're in dangerous environments. I mean, when you walk through a refinery and, you're strolling amongst large vessels of highly explosive material,
right?
You really have to trust the system. You have to trust the people you're working with. You have to trust the process. I mean,
yeah.
If you don't, you can't work, right? I mean, it's pretty impossible. So but yeah, it was quite different for me in terms of just experiencing the different ways that the different industries, kind of evolved on this topic.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And energy is a great example, because energy is a fundamental fact of our lives. I mean, like, everything that I do in my career is affected by the ability to, at the base level, plug something in the wall and have 120 volts AC delivered on demand without me ever questioning it. And therein is a bit of trust, like just a little bit of trust sitting in the back end of that system, that everything is going to function as it needs to coming out the other side. Yeah, I think we've lost something vital when we forget that how many times during the day you have to count on that very thing that you just talked about, walking through a plant with essentially bombs sitting, to your right and to your left, and knowing that the people around you have built a system that is going to protect you without you having a contract, without you having any of those things. You have to do that, and they know that too, right? They know that you're placing your trust in them when you do that as well. And that is how human relationships are born. That's how they thrive. That to me is the interesting part of leading. That's what I think. That's what the joy in leadership is about: is helping people thrive in those kinds of environments, and recognizing what humanity they bring to that process. So,
yeah, I think I do think one of the things that in engineers, I mean all of us, but certainly I think engineers at times who are trained to get the answer right and not necessarily focus as much on other things, or be more focused on the numbers and not the story or the people all the time. And I think one other aspect is, how do you view the role of, vulnerability in building trust, and having that, that self-awareness and self-confidence at some level to be vulnerable enough to get folks to, kind of get past that paradox kind of, point in the relationship?
That is a stupendous question, because I think I should tell you, the middle part of my career, I was kind of what I would say moderately well known in circles in Silicon Valley. I was brought in by VCs a lot to help troubled companies. So they parachute me in to a company struggling for whatever reason, and I was quote unquote there to fix it, right?
Right.
And the challenge with that kind of thing is that, of course, you're being brought in by the people with money, and the moment I show up in your office, you kind of know something's wrong already. The fact that I'm there, and you're inherently not going to trust me. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of a venture capitalist, and that's a terrifying prospect when that's the thing you need to survive. But at the same point, I need information, and you need the whatever wisdom I can bring to the table. And so the only way that ever works in short term is by me being vulnerable enough to explain to them, yeah, this feels goofy, like let me take you through my perspective on why I'm here and what I can do and what I can't do in a reasonable period of time, et cetera, et cetera. And part of that is letting the people that I'm working with understand that, yeah, I don't have the answer here either, but let's see if we can go discover it together. A lot of leadership training is not about that. You use the word confidence in the midst of this, right? I can be unsure and still confident that I will find the answer.
Right.
I think a lot of people have translated the words confidence and trust as virtually synonymous, and they're actually not. I can have confidence that you, Doug, will deliver on the thing that I've told you to go off and do. But trusting you to get it done by Thursday and not checking on you on Tuesday and Wednesday beforehand, that's a totally different thing.
Right.
And of course, in an engineering context, it's even screwier, because we have Gantt charts, we have a certain amount of hours. This is going to happen by Tuesday, and you're tracking progress. You tend to think that everything is very definitive and well mapped out, and you forget that one of your coworkers, her kid has the flu and she can't come in, and there's all this other human stuff that sits behind it that you just want to say, okay, since I can't measure it, I'm going to quote unquote ignore it. It's messy, right? And I think that the key is to be vulnerable enough to recognize the messiness and say it out loud.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I know, I read one of the other, I forget where you wrote this, but I wrote it down so I remember it. And you said, trust cannot be measured, so we do not seek its pulse. Relationship does not graph nicely on PowerPoint, so we stop trying to foster it.
Yeah.
that was a, and the reason that struck me is because as engineers, we tend to measure and to track and to count and to graph and chart and, right. And
right. And if you can't measure it, you're told, I mean, we all took Deming's classes. We all did the, Six Sigma training and all the rest of it. Right. So what gets measured gets done. We get told over and over and over. And we forget that humans don't fall into those buckets all the time. And so we try to get rid of anything that can't be measured. And in the end, I think we might have lost something vital in that. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that transition from what you called it indentured servitude, more normally referred to as, individual contributor to, to a leader role. I ask everyone this, and it's certainly one of my, more poignant memories, but was there a moment in time for me, it was a tearful night on the stoop of my house, where I really sort of had that, revelation that this is different, right? And it was that my day and my objectives had to be largely all about everyone else and not about me, and that if I was going to succeed, I had to stop sort of working harder as an individual and work a lot harder on bringing a team together. Did you have one of those sort of events in your career as you made that transition?
Yes. Yeah, and I didn't have the crying on the front porch. I had the head down on my desk, retching into a waste bin or something like that. It was just awful. And I was terrible at it. And part of the reason I was terrible at it is I don't think I hadn't really gotten a sense of myself. What did I stand for? What did I believe in? And so I tried to be early on. I'm sure it's very common. I tried to be everything to everybody. Right. Everybody's opinion of what, and so you hunt around and I had my mentors. I went to all of them, and you've got to be more like this, and you've got to be more like that, and act like this person, and be like that person. And somehow the self got, myself got lost in all that. And just exactly just like you talked about, right? I had to get to a point where where what wasn't working for me was serving everybody else's idea of leadership without understanding what it meant for me. What did it mean? And some of that was going to piss off some people. That was going to make some people happy. It didn't, to me, at the end, that didn't matter. If I was going to be happy with myself, that was going to be the thing that ultimately was going to turn it for me. But man, getting there, it was a death march. It was terrible, and I was bad at it. I was really, really bad at it. But fortunately, I had very patient bosses above me who saw something that I didn't see, and were like, "It's okay. You'll be, it'll get better." And eventually, it did. But early on, yeah, that transition was not great.
Yeah. Well, and it's fundamental to what we're trying to do with engineering leadership in these discussions and sessions. It's remind folks that this is something that can be learned. It can be taught. Leaders can be built. Because I think people do hear the stereotypes so often. Oh, they were just they're a born leader. I'm like, well, not that certain tendencies aren't born with certain folks. If they're more extroverted, they're more comfortable in front of a crowd, perhaps. I mean, those things certainly help. Those don't make people good leaders either. And I think it's good to remind folks that this is I think we all stink at it in the beginning.
I actually think there's a lot to be said for people that stink at it and try to get better, more so than people that take confidence and turn it into cockiness, right. And they become this dysfunctional character of a leader that nobody really wants to be around, but nobody's going to tell them they're not that way. I mean, that's back to your vulnerability and humility. Those things, your willingness to learn and improve is a key aspect of getting better at this. And part of that is trusting yourself. So if you don't start there, I don't know where you're going to find it elsewhere. You're certainly not going to find it in a book or in a third party. So,
yeah. Well, when you were coming into do these turnarounds and fix these companies and kind of, as you said, parachute into the chaos. I got to imagine you found situations where trust had not only probably maybe perhaps wasn't existing, but had been broken. Right? Where'd you start on those things? I mean, that's
yeah, it's hard. Partially because leadership is also the symbol of leadership. So if you're the CEO, people, whether you're a brand new person, and I can guarantee you, I look nothing like the person that occupied the chair before me.
Right.
The way you start off is assumed that it's a continuation of the way that it was before. And in it, I would find myself inadvertently saying or doing things and just being myself, and somebody go, aha, he's just like the other guy. He said that thing too. They connect these weird pieces, disconnected pieces of the narrative into a whole that I learned tried to reduce some of their own discomfort with a new person coming in. So the way that I tried to break it down was by calling it out. Like I would get the staff together, and we would have a conversation around, like, look, here's who I am. Here's the way I like to do things. Does that work for you, or doesn't it work for you? If it doesn't work for you, then we got to have a different conversation. And the different conversation may be that you're gonna leave, and that's okay. That I have no problem with that. But let's talk about who I am openly, and then figure out how we can use that to help move the ball forward here at the company. And then when you say that, you actually have to do it.
Right.
And that's the piece that I think starts to build the trust. It doesn't happen. It absolutely doesn't happen overnight. You're given the gift of the title, which is going to get you a certain open door, but it only goes so far. You have to do the rest of the work yourself, and it is literally person to person.
Yeah, no doubt. What's your favorite book on this topic? You got any recommendations for our listeners?
Yeah. Okay. So I have a couple, but it's kind of weird. So I would,
wrong.
So I think the ones that have had the biggest effect on me in terms of the way that I approach people are stuff that help me do a little bit of inner work, understand who I am when I show up. I mean, I take a step back before I say this. One of the I think great opportunities for a leader is to understand the triggers that are hidden from them. This is the value of a good mentor. A mentor who can look at you and go, so-and-so really got under your skin. Why? Why did that? And what does that mean? Sometimes you don't even know. And having a third pair of eyes that you can absolutely trust, or a second pair of eyes that you can absolutely trust and tell you this thing doesn't fit with, I think, who you are, right, makes a huge difference. And so as soon as you go down that path, you recognize that, I recognize that any good leader that doesn't have an interior life, that isn't working on their own stuff, is probably not going to be at it for long. And so the kind of books that I read on the subject, and basically anything on or around Carl Jung, or the shadow self,
right,
super useful. Books around mythology and the power of myth and myth making. So Joseph Campbell, anything around the hero's journey, super useful. And then I read. I am a nerd. So the Apollo stories. You want to talk about great engineering and great engineering leadership? Anything around the Apollo stories. I just read the story of Apollo 11. I forget the author's name. I'll go look that up for you. There's a book by Gene Kranz called "Failure Is Not an Option." Great book.
That's a great one.
Flight of the Buffalo. I don't know if you've ever read that. That's a good one.
That one.
Fierce Conversations. The other thing, Fierce Conversations, You Are What You Say. These are all ones that I kind of go back to over and over, because the only way that we interact with other people is usually through conversation, and getting my words to match what I've got going on inside rectitude, being true to what I am saying internally and externally, that becomes important too.
Those are great. So I wanted to deviate a little bit. You've been in this high-tech space for a long time. You've obviously been a renowned figure in the whole system on a chip, evolution, right, from ARM and others. And where do you see that? Where do you see those trends taking us from back a little bit more from an engineering standpoint? How's leadership playing a different role in that? Because the business to me seems to be becoming more abstract, right? It's not not as vertically integrated right to the substrate as it once was, right? So is that changing the role of, when I think about trust, right? It's interpersonal trust, and then but these supply chains that are being built now in your industry are, far more elaborate, diverse, distributed, and couldn't exist without trust, right?
Correct. Yeah. So, well, and then you layer COVID and the pandemic over it. It goes from being very difficult to not impossible. I mean, a lot of our supply chain actually exists in Asia.
Yeah.
So, I'll be at the dinner table in the evening. I'm sure you go through this too. I'm in the dinner table, phone starts ringing at 6 o'clock and, Asia's open. And so I'm dealing with Japan and China and Taiwan and all the rest of it. And the only way that works is that I have pre-existing relationships. I've been out to dinner with these people,
right,
and they kind of know, and we're all suffering through the same thing. And so there's a built-in piece of trust that I'm afforded there. But you have to work super, super hard at the communication. So you're talking a lot more than you would have before, because you're not going to rely on a plane ticket 6 weeks from now to go settle the final deal. So I actually think that especially as it relates to things like the pandemic, I'm not sure international business travel is ever going to come back to the way it was before. I've certainly figured out how much I can push it and get stuff done, and I can actually get a lot of stuff done over the phone and video chats, more so than I would have thought was possible.
Right.
It's not to say it'll go away completely, but I think it's still going to be there. The other thing that's gone on with all of this is the management tools have evolved to this point where now you're using lots of technology to watch chats going on amongst your team and following up on your action items automatically getting populated onto my to-do list without me writing them down, and things like that. I personally worry that takes away from the conversation that I would have otherwise had about this stuff, and some loss of human connection at the expense of making sure that I've got another data point that I can track. So I unfortunately see that trend continuing and expanding, and I don't see that going away anytime soon, because there is some comfort around that to people who want to see that something's being done even when they're not paying attention to it. I can't say that I like it though. So I see those trends happening for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've talked about a lot on our team is, depending on how much longer this goes on, we've been at it almost a year now. And I've seen, trust come up in two different ways. One of which is, just like you said, for the previously established relationships have been so important, right? So the fact that, even though we can't go to dinner and catch up now, after the formal meeting, we have done that already, and something about their family and
exactly,
and their children. And again, it's in some ways it's become more intimate because I think folks are more comfortable talking about kind of everything that's going on in their life, because, it's just the messiness of everyday life is sort of inserted into the environment.
Well, to the thing that we were talking about before,
your office. And I mean, you don't have any, it's just, it's definitely a different sort of communication medium, which pulls all that together.
Right. I agree. And sorry to interrupt. What I was saying was that the back to this other topic you and I were talking about before, because we're all kind of finding our way through this at the same time, there is forced vulnerability in the system. And you calling up a supplier, and the first 10 minutes is, man, homeschool with kids over video chat is like, and he's like, yeah, and you end up in this other conversation that you wouldn't have had before. There's a connection made there that I think ends up helping things over the long haul, because you're both suffering a little bit.
Yeah.
And in a counterintuitive way, I think it's been good. I know on our team, my team right now, the fact that we have to communicate so much. I mean, there was a point where we literally couldn't get in our building. They'd shut the building. Everything went on lockdown, and everything in our business relates to being in a lab and building things.
Right.
So we went on this crash program of getting guys set up in their garages. And so there would be these moments where, hey, I drove over to so-and-so's house and I dropped the parts off in his mailbox. And then he had some parts in the mailbox. I reprogrammed them in my car and then stuffed them back in the mailbox. And they're like super excited that they came up with this horrifyingly complex answer to get a product to a customer. And yet we were closer as a result of this. And I kept looking at this going, all right, this is bad. I don't want to subject this to everybody to this all the time, but there are some blessings that are coming out of this that are really interestingly nice. I don't think I'd reduplicate any of it, but pretty nice.
Yeah. The questions we have are more about, how different is it going to be to start new relationships and to find, we're doing more business than we ever have with our existing customers. I think because, they haven't, they're sort of reluctant to go engage in new relationships too, and they're not sure how to do that. So it just, more and more, as long as we keep building that trust in the relationship itself, it's really paid off in ways that it historically didn't, because it was, not as linear a process for folks. But we are faced with, establishing new relationships, finding new customers, and getting them, and building that sense of trust. When
doing that over Zoom, or any video chatting application. Oh my gosh, super difficult.
Yeah.
In our business, what we make are air movers, cooling devices, and a key part of the entire sales process is you put your hand in front of this device and you feel the air move. That is gone for us. Right. So how do you do this in front of a customer? Because now not only they have to trust that what I'm saying I've got, but a key aspect of its performance is something that you're not going to see until you figure out how to buy it from me. Oh my gosh, super difficult.
Yeah, for our listeners, Ventiva does make and for those of you like me I find the whine of the fan on my laptop to be bad. So I was going to ask you, like, how far can you scale these things up? Because, man, if I could get rid of all these, moving cooling devices with one of your, solid state devices, it would be a pretty good day for me personally. So
that would, and that would be a very good day for us too. So,
yeah.
They scale. They just so you know, they do scale up to that kind of application. There's a logical limit to the stuff that we have. But yeah, it's a solid state air mover. So it's tiny. It blows air, and it carries no meaning for you if I show it to you on a video screen. Zero. So yeah, we've had to learn this whole other language around our stuff, and I have to say that too has been pretty useful. You do get, I think, without all of the pain that the pandemic has put on, we fall into habits of conversation that we've broken that down a little bit on now. And that'll make, when this is done, that'll make us much better about explaining it when we go to third parties.
Yeah, no, we just all got to get better at those things, right? I think.
Yep.
Any particular Clemson moments that come back to you on
oh my gosh,
journey around leadership? We're obviously we'll have lots of folks listen to this, but we're focused on our Clemson audience as much as anything. Sure.
Yeah, I had a couple things. One is it's where I met my wife, and so when you have that kind of thing happen in a locale, you can't not feel just a penumbra of satisfaction every time I show up there with her. Of course, when you take your kids on tours there, they are not thrilled at all to hear all the stories that you had as young lovers in the place. But I would say that I did a senior project, so it's computer science and computer engineering. I did a senior project that I went to one of my professors, Dr. Roy Pargas. I think he's still there. Great guy. And I said, I want to go do this thing. I've been, I've been studying, this particular area of electrical engineering, and I think there's something that can really be done to automate some of it. I'd like to take a semester and call it a course, and go see if I can develop this piece of code. And this is a great example of trust, because you got some kid showing up in your office saying there's not a course on the schedule that says, this is what deserves an A and this is what deserves to be. And we designed the curriculum together, and I worked my butt off on this thing for an entire semester, learned an absolute ton of information around it. And it was all based on the fact that the professor believed that I was actually going to do what I said I was going to do. So there was a thread of trust running through that whole thing. It was just absolutely, I don't know that any other school in that would have been 1985, 84. I don't know any other school at that time that would have done something similar in this, the field of computer science when you're trying to prepare people to go out into the workforce. But he did, and he got it approved, because he has to, of course, get that approved by the department and everything else. So it was this super.
There had to be trust all the system, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, I think that it's definitely a unique environment there. For
yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
What about the? Do you think the changes to the supply chains, some pandemic, some political? I mean, obviously there's I think there's a lot of growing tension with China and for lots of reasons, but certainly in the high tech industry where so much of the manufacturing has shifted and the supply chains have extended. How do you view trust and the role of it in that, like that extended sort of supply chain manner, and is it going to be harder to build and maintain that trust in this environment, or easier?
So I think it's harder in some aspects geopolitically. When you talk about, like, we had a bunch of customers in China. I was sitting on boards of companies that had business in China, and all of a sudden you're being told you can't. And it's nothing that they've done. The company that you're working with has done. Right. It's nothing that you've done, but it's you're dealing with some larger geopolitical concern. And now everybody reverts to their corners. We turn into Americans, and they turn into the Chinese Communist Party, and right. I think that's going to be really hard to get back. In spite of the fact that I have spent a ton of time in China, and been out to dinner and been to people's houses, and all of the things about relationship building, that is going to be super hard to get back under any circumstances. Even though the relationships, and I still make it a point of reaching out to those folks just to touch in. Nothing, I can't do any business with them, and we can't interact the way that we used to, but I still value the relationship. In other aspects where the supply chain has had to pick up the slack left by the folks that you couldn't do business with before, it really, really helps if you had a backup. If you knew that you were going to get this done in Taiwan or Malaysia or somewhere else as a secondary way of getting your product built, you're much better off than you would have been trying to do that or build that up right now. And that has served us well, because we've had those relationships already. So I see greater emphasis on the stuff we have, but I don't see, in my personal opinion, the supply chain running through China is always going to be impacted for certainly the rest of my career to a certain degree.
Yeah. I think it's easy for younger folks to forget that. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, graduated Clemson in '94, and so we were at the transition of a divided, there was two worlds, right? I mean, there was the Soviets and everybody aligned with them, and then there was the West and everyone aligned with that side, and there of course was the Berlin Wall in the middle, was this the symbolic divide, but I don't think we've thought through entirely what that means to
Mhm.
in a world that's so much more connected, right?
It
With all
is.
our systems and our networks and our whether they're monetary, whether they're informational, whether
Yeah.
and the energy system that connects everybody, which I work in, is it's become, once those barriers did come down, in the early 90s and then beyond, obviously, all of our businesses are built to sort of live in a world that is
Interconnected.
pretty interconnected and integrated, right? And now I don't know. I think there's a period coming at us where you're going to have two different supply chains for many things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've wondered, I mean, I'm not, I'm a armchair sociologist when it comes to this kind of stuff, but there is a generational divide here. If you grew up in the 50s and 60s with the divide between East and West as we understood it, the Iron Curtain,
Yeah.
I think you're innately more comfortable with the divide, thinking of the world as being able to still be divided that way, the good guys and the bad guys. And that's the lot of, I mean, I'll just say it. That's a lot of what our leadership is right now. Not that they're bad people, but they have a worldview that started under, a divided world. And you and I are asking a lot of these questions right now around like, wait a minute, it doesn't quite work that way in point of fact. I may say my car is built here in Detroit, but 60% of the components are coming from places outside of the United States, and a healthy number of those came from China. How do I suddenly fix that thing? And what does that look like? And so before we bring that wall down and say you can't go over there, how do I get time to get my supply chain in order to make that happen? Very hard to do.
Yeah, no, and I think it's something that we just haven't faced in a better part of a whole generation. And I've never had to work in that kind of, I certainly was a kid in that environment, so I remember it, but I didn't have, I wasn't working yet. So just
right.
Our world's always been connected on every level.
And,
it's definitely going to be a big change for folks. And I think building, new supply chains and new capabilities and new teams, around the world in different places is going to, I think it's just, none of that can happen without trust.
Yep. I agree.
Such a fundamental skill. I mean, I think that, I do think your points earlier about, self-reflection and self-knowledge are critical, right? It's, if you don't have that, if you're not comfortable in your own skin, that's a different way of putting it, then you're never going to have that needed vulnerability for folks to get close to you and trust you. And
right. You can't give to somebody else what you haven't given to yourself. And I think the job of today's leadership, engineering or not, is to show up comfortable in your own skin and help somebody else get to being a better person. You get that kind of thing going in your team or in your group, amazing things happen without you even looking at it. And they're mowing the lawn and they're thinking about the problem because they love what they're doing. That's the joy of work. That's the joy of being involved with a group of people trying to fit to a common purpose. And it can be a mundane thing like flipping hamburgers, but you can still find joy in it. But it really does depend on leadership that at its base level trusts you.
Yeah, no doubt. What else, Carl? What would you tell these folks in terms of any particular idea on where to get started if they, haven't thought a lot about this yet?
I think you mentioned this at the beginning, and I'll just echo it. Finding yourself good mentors is critical, and they should not be in your in your current management chain.
Right.
They should be disinterested third-party observers who all they care about is whether or not you get it or not. And make sure that that mentor list is diverse. If you're a male, find females, find people of color, find people in alternative sectors of the industry, get diversity of opinion coming into you, because that's what gives you dimensionality around who you are as how you are perceived as a leader. And then I think the other thing, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but I think I guarantee you've had people working for you that were they were just kind of irritated. They got under your skin. They pushed you a little bit. They asked questions. They kept coming in your office when you didn't have time. They did all these things, and they ended up being leaders later on, and you knew it was happening. You saw it happening as they were doing it. I would encourage people to be that person, the person that you expect better things from yourself and the people around you, and you're willing to push a little bit. It's not always going to get you satisfaction. You're not always going to be happy with it. And there will be bosses that you work for that will absolutely hate it. But you want to align yourself with the people that take that pushing and return it in kind. So those would be the two pieces of advice I give people starting out.
Yeah, no, and I think, I've found out even, I was fortunate to have great mentors, and as I've done mentoring now for many years, I'm always, a lot of folks always are feeling thankful about that, and thank you for doing this. And I'm like, you don't have to thank me, because I get way more out of this than I give, right? Like and now it's that diversity of perspective too, right? Because you can see the organization from a different view, particularly as you do get into the CEO or president role. You're like, you need that unvarnished, disinterested perspective, and to be able to really see what's happening at times.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Let's be honest. I'm a privileged white guy. And that's afforded me a lot of blessings in my career, but it has blinkered me in a number of different ways that I only get better when I'm exposed to the alternative opinion, even when it gets me bothered. Because what I'm figuring out is, why was I blind there? Why didn't I know that? Why didn't I ask that question? And it usually has something to do with the way that I didn't want to see the world. And that's part of self-improvement. And I think it's also part of you're constantly trying to get better at your job. I think that's the role of a good leader. You're always willing to get a little bit better.
Yeah, well, and it's a good one to close it out with, because that is our theme. Leaders are built, not born. And as we know, as engineers, getting anything built takes a lot of hard work.
Yeah, a good group of folks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carl. And
appreciate it.
Appreciate you giving us your time and wisdom and experience, and spending time with us today. Thank you.
Thanks. It's been a lovely conversation. I enjoyed it.